In the year 2020, Joe Biden campaigned as a leader who could unite America, a leader who could bring the polarized country together. But a year later, the United States still remains divided. It has been a year since the U.S. Capitol witnessed its worst riots in history, an attack on the American democracy. Outside the Capitol last year, Biden's inaugural address was focused on healing. And now Joe Biden left the rhetoric, blaming former President Donald Trump for the chaos and carnage at the Capitol last year.
For the first time in our history, a president had not just lost an election, he tried to prevent the peaceful transfer of power as a violent mob breached the Capitol. But they failed. They failed. And on this day of remembrance, we must make sure that such attack never happens again. And here's the truth. The former President of the United States of America has created and spread a web of lies about the 2020 election. He's done so because he values power over principle, because he sees his own interest as more important than his country's interest, than America's interest.
The U.S. president did not seem to mince his words. He went after Trump and his supporters, slamming them for questioning the legitimacy of the elections. He also endorsed national efforts to enact election reform, a move that Biden says will counter any attempts to undermine voting rights.
This wasn't a group of tourists. This was an armed insurrection. They weren't looking to uphold the will of the people. They were looking to deny the will of the people. They weren't looking to uphold a free and fair election. They were looking to overturn one. They were looking to save the cause of America. They were looking to subvert the Constitution. And so at this moment, we must decide, what kind of nation are we going to be? Are we going to be a nation that accepts political violence as a norm? Are we going to be a nation where we allow partisan election officials to overturn the legally expressed will of the people? Are we going to be a nation that lives not by the light of the truth, but in the shadow of lies? We cannot allow ourselves to be that kind of nation. The way forward is to recognize the truth and to live by it.
While the world was listening to every word of that address, someone who was paying extra attention was the former president himself. Donald Trump responded to that address by releasing an angry statement accusing Biden of destroying the country.
Talk about it until.
Let's go straight across now to our correspondent Nick Harper, who is reporting from right outside the Capitol Hill building. Nick, just a year ago, that building behind you witnessed its worst riots when Donald Trump supporters stormed into the Capitol Hill. It was called an attack on democracy by the U.S. president just a short while ago as well. And then there has been a counterattack by Donald Trump himself. Help us better understand where the two leaders stand at this point and the message that has been sent out by them.
Yeah, exactly 1 year ago today, I was here on this spot just a few meters from where we are again today, and the scene was very different. But we're still seeing what we saw a year ago, those very deep divisions that are within the country, as highlighted, as you mentioned, by the two very different responses of these two leaders. President Biden saying that his predecessor bore sole responsibility for what happened 12 months ago, that his lies that he's continuing to propagate are continuing to put democracy under threat. But at the same time, you've got the former president, Donald Trump, putting out that statement saying that he still thinks that he won the election. and that President Biden has only been making these speeches to try and deflect attention away from himself. President Trump saying that President Biden is doing a terrible job at running the country. Those divisions still run very deep in the country, and this idea that democracy is an unstable being is very much real and present today. Polls out over the last few days suggest that there are a large proportion of Americans who don't believe last year's election was free and fair, that the November 2020 presidential election was won by Donald Trump. 70% of Republicans feel that it was falsely stolen from him, and 30% of all Americans, Democrats and Republicans, don't believe that it was a legitimate election. So those divisions, that partisan divide, was very clear 12 months ago. It was on display at the Capitol, but it's still very much on display 12 months on.
Right, Nick, let's also talk about the prosecution so far. Over 725 people have been charged with crimes ranging from disorderly conduct to assaulting the police. Out of them, 165 pleaded guilty. Where do things stand as far as the prosecution and delivering justice is concerned? When we look at these numbers, there is definitely a clear sign that a lot remains to be done.
Well, absolutely. The Justice Department has made it very clear that there is still a lot of work to be done. They've moved very quickly over the course of the last year to prosecute these people. Of those 125 or so who've pleaded guilty, several dozen have already been sentenced, some of them for up to 5 years. But there's many more, potentially 2,500 people who could still face arrest and prosecution. And the trials of those who have pleaded not guilty will begin to get underway towards the end of next month. On top of that, the Attorney General Merrick Garland, just 24 hours ago, in a speech detailing the progress of all of this, said that they were going above and beyond to hold everyone at any level, he said, responsible for what happened, suggesting not just the rioters who were here at Capitol Hill, but people who were not here could also be held accountable. In other words, Donald Trump and his inner circle, because that's part of what the prosecutions are trying to find out, exactly what was known and when, whether Donald Trump and his advisors knew that there was an attack plan but did nothing to stop it. And there is a congressional subcommittee that is continuing its investigation to look at that side of things, while the criminal prosecutions are continuing as headed up by the Justice Department.
All right, we're leaving it there for the moment. Nick Harper getting us those inputs and details. Thanks very much for the moment. And the U.S. Congress witnessed the House Speaker Nancy Pelosi also addressing the lawmakers just a short while back. Let's listen in.
All of you rose to honor our oath and protect our democracy. We did so honoring the words of President Lincoln during the Civil War. Fellow citizens, he said, we cannot escape history. We will be remembered in spite of ourselves. No personal significance or insignificance can spare us one or another. We hold the power, therefore we bear the responsibility, Lincoln said. Today, we accept responsibility as daunting and demanding as any that previous generations of leadership have faced. Since the January 6th insurrection, there have been continued assaults on our democracy, undermining the sanctity of the vote and the integrity of our elections, which are the basis of our democracy. Let us be true to the vision of our founders, who brilliantly established our democracy and made it a model for the world. Let us honor the sacrifice of our men and women in uniform who protect that freedom with their lives. And let us remember the words of another president, our patriarch, President George Washington. When he delivered the Constitution to the Congress, he said this. He said, "This Constitution represents the creation of a government which would allow for the continuation of rigorous debate, but relies upon the common sense and good faith of the American people to find the better angels of our nature." As we proceed, let us find our common ground, reach our nation's heights with liberty and justice for all, remembering the words of our great patriarch, and in the spirit that our chaplain referenced of President Lincoln, with malice toward none, with charity toward all. Let us acknowledge today, as I conclude, I want to acknowledge our fallen heroes of that day. U.S. Capitol Police Officer Brian Sicknick, U.S. Capitol Police Officer Howard Livingood, Metropolitan Officer Jeffrey Smith, U.S. Capitol Police Officer Billy Evans of a later assault. Now I ask all members to rise for a moment of silence in their memory.
WION now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.